Right, I don't see anybody coming in. So once again, if you can, please grab a pad of paper and a pen out in the back. If you have any questions, you'll be writing those questions down while the presentations are going on. So make sure you got that if you need it. Okay? Hi, I'm Laura Backle. Welcome to the TIP Forum. Thank you so much for coming. We're going to try to get started as close as possible on time as we can. I'll be facilitating the forum tonight. Let's go over the agenda. Does everybody have it in front of them? Okay, if you don't, there's copies in the back. We'll have opening remarks. We'll have presentations from our esteemed colleagues over here. We'll have a Q&A session at the end. So I'm going to go over some of the Q&A do's and don'ts here. Let's see. After that, I was doing no, already moved. Okay. Please sign in at the back of the room. Restrooms outside this room to the right. We've provided you with a pen and a small notepad. Please write down your presentations as you listen to the presentations. TPB staff here will be looking for those questions. So just wave them in the air if you've got a question. We'll collect them, group similar questions, and answer them during the Q&A period. We'll do the same thing for any online questions. Please use the Q&A feature and enter a question so we can keep track. I'm now going to turn things over to Katie to go over the Zoom logistics and our expectations for meeting conduct.
So thank you, Laura. Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Harrison. I work for ERG and I'm providing Zoom support for today. So first off, this public forum is being recorded and a meeting summary will be provided in the final plan documents. For my virtual attendees, your webcams and microphones have been turned off so we can preserve audio and video quality during the presentations. But again, if you have questions, whether it be Zoom meeting technical assistance or about the presentations you're going to see tonight, please put them into the Q&A box at any time. And please note that Q&A will be monitored and any inappropriate language or content will be deleted and the host may reject you. So with that, I'll turn it back to Laura.
And I'm here to introduce Andrew.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Katie. My name is Andrew Austin. I'm a transportation planner here at the Transportation Planning Board at the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. Thank you and welcome and thank you for joining us at tonight's public forum on the draft fiscal year 2026 to 2029 Transportation Improvement Program. Because that is so many words, we're going to use a lot of shorthand tonight. We're often going to call that just the TIP, or if we need to differentiate it, the FY 26-29 TIP. So tonight is our chance to tell you about our product that we are responsible for producing that doesn't always get as much attention as the long range plan, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, and the big planning efforts, but it is critically important to implementing those planning efforts. We are in the midst of a 30-day comment period on our plan and TIP, but we want to be clear on the nature of tonight's forum. This is what we consider as an educational opportunity. It's a chance to bring our audience sort of up to speed with this lesser known document and give it a little bit more accessibility rather than a public comment garnering vehicle. So tonight is not on the record. Tonight is a discussion. It's not a public comment of you. I do want to start off with the clicker. Is that over here? Thank you. I do want to start off with a little bit of an exercise. I'm going to read down a short list of names or terms, and if you're familiar with it, then you can sort of raise your hand. Or just nod your head if you're, don't want to raise your hand. If you haven't heard of it, just keep your hand down or give me a head shake. This is just to see how much of our audience knows. Maybe we can skip a couple slides here. So let's say National Capital Region. Heard of that? Good. Most of you are soaking in that. Good. The Transportation Planning Board. Good. Okay, moving right along. Metropolitan Planning Organization. Good. Lots of hands like to see that. How are we doing online? We're moving lots of hands over there too. Okay, good. All right, wonderful. A Metropolitan Transportation Plan. Good, good, good. Visualize 2050. Yeah, all right. Very encouraging. Transportation Improvement Program. Okay, just a few less hands, but that's good. Still a good sign. And I'm just gonna go through these last three really fast. Appropriation, allocation, obligation. Okay, all right. All right, so we know where we're at. We will kind of breeze through this first little bit then. Where am I pointing this?
That's okay. Say next slide.
Let's just do that. Yeah, next slide, please. So we are the Transportation Planning Board. We are made up of 22 local governments, 44 members. They're the National Capital Region, about just under 6 million people, 3.3 million employees, just over 3.5 3.5 thousand square miles. I should put my glasses back on because this is where the reading part comes in. I was like, why did the print get so small all of a sudden? So the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, or Visualize 2050, it's developed cooperatively by our region's transportation agencies. And as many of you know, this is the culmination of a very long time. We've been working on this 2 years for this planning process. It's met our fiscal constraint obligations, and it's met our air quality standards. It covers our 20-year period. It goes out to 2050, and we have been updating it every 4 years at the least, at minimum. So, next slide, please. We can move on to. Yeah, sorry, that was that one. I'm going to need more help with this next slide, but next slide, please. One more time now. There we go. So this is where we're at here, the Transportation Improvement Program. 4 is kind of the magical number for us. It must be updated every 4 years. It must cover at least 4 years. And it's sort of what we consider the first 4 years, the implementation of the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, or Visualize 2050 in this case. It shows the planned funding for project implementation, planning and engineering, right-of-way acquisition, construction, all of that. Doesn't guarantee that that's when those events are going to happen per se. It is not a capital improvement program. That's sort of something more done at the local level, but they're much more concise schedules. This is more about the funding. In fact, we'd like to say that it's really laser focused in on 2 federal aspects: federal funding and federal requirements. It is continuously amended, which keeps me and my team busy to no end throughout the year. As each agency sort of updates it with the latest information, both financially and project-wise. I want to take a quick pause here, just to there is an asterisk there. The first time we use the word projects and programs, you're going to hear us say the word projects a lot tonight. And we're just going to use that as a shorthand, because much like Transportation Improvement Program is a lot of words to say. Every time we say project, we really mean record, which could mean anything from a position, a purchase of buses, a program, an actual project. It could mean project oversight. It could mean an administrative type of record. It could mean so many things, anything that we're actually putting in money for. So that is just one of our little other shorthands that we'll be using tonight. So there are a number of, next slide please. There are a number of federal requirements. As it was said, federal funding and federal requirements are the 2 things we're looking at here. The federal requirements, the big 3, right off the bat, are the federal planning factors. These were first introduced with the first Transportation Efficiency Act legislation that was done in 1991. They have been changed and morphed over the years to come to these 10 that are listed on the right-hand side. I'm not going to read through them all. You can read those there. But basically, they are principles that FHWA wants metropolitan planning organizations and state DOTs to focus on when developing their projects, to make sure that they are addressing these in nature or in kind. So the federal planning factors, the next one is the air quality. emissions we need to make sure are generated by the use of the transportation system moving into the future are in do not exceed pollution limits that have been set forth by the EPA. And finally, funding, the tip must be financially constrained. And for non-attainment areas like us, or maintenance areas like us, as we soon will be, the funding in the first two fiscal years of the tip must be available and committed. That means it has to be real money, has to be, you have to know where that's coming from in the paycheck to put that out there. The next federal requirement, next slide please, is public involvement and transparency. So the TPB follows all of its all federal regulations and the TPB's public participation plan. We have a 30-day public comment period when we adopt a new tip, which is what we're in right now, the 30-day comment period for that. Or when any agency updates all its records, that's kind of akin to doing a new tip. So we do a 30-day public comment period, which when either of those triggers happens. We do other comment periods when we have amendments that are considered monthly by the TPB steering committee. These are published for public review 1 week prior to the request for approval by the steering committee. Following the steering committee's approval, all amendments are published as part of the meeting materials for the next TPB meeting. And at that meeting, the full board is briefed on each amendment and has the opportunity to request a review of any actions taken by the steering committee at that time. And one last thing, we've got the, as public participation, we have the formal public meeting on the development of the tip. Congratulations, you're soaking in it right now. This is our public forum. And finally, we've got the planning-based, or not finally, actually, we've got one more. We've got the performance-based planning and programming. This is a requirement from the US DOT that funding in the tip should be based on an investment plan to attain a set of TPB approved performance targets. Performance targets include congestion mitigation and air quality, highway pavement and bridge condition, transit asset management, highway safety, highway system reliability, highway safety, and transit safety. And finally, in our federal requirements, we have a congestion management process. This is where the federal law requires that TPB provide for the safe and effective integrated management and operation of the multimodal transportation systems. Again, that's a lot of words. Basically, it's a systematic approach to monitoring the performance of the region's transportation system and identifying and evaluating benefits of various congestion management strategies. What it's been in the past has been essentially making sure that all strategies that are available to us to be employed or be examined or employed before we add single occupant vehicle capacity for projects like that. But that's sort of what we've just done in the past, and that's actually being expanded upon quite significantly with this plan. The development of the FY 26-29 tip. The TPB issued our technical input solicitation policy guide back in February of 2023, quite a while ago now. Regionally significant for air quality projects were due in December of 2023. Those had to be compiled into a transportation demand model and programmed and modeled throughout to see what the emissions would be, so that we can determine if we were in conformity for the air quality standards. In April of 2025, TPB staff began working with the region's transportation improvement agencies on the draft tip, which we have now compiled. All inputs for those for the tip were due in May 2025, and we've been working with the agencies since then to refine and analyze the tip. All inputs for the tip, the projects in previous, the projects from the previous tip were rolled over as inputs to start for, and then each agency has based their inputs on their STIP, with the exception of WMATA, which plays with DDOT, and we'll explain those STIPs in a moment here when we hand this over to the agencies. But our tip must be consistent with the DOT agency's STIPs, which are the statewide transportation improvement program. So whereas ours is a regional transportation improvement program, it gets incorporated into each of the state's transportation tips. State. You see why we shortened it that way. And to talk more about that project selection, we have to my left here, we have Mark Phillips from WMATA. We have Ben Hampton from the District Department of Transportation. We have Regina Moore from the Virginia Department of Transportation. And we have Carrie Snyder from Maryland Department of Transportation. So we have put little slides from their input they've got little slides. Yeah. They've given us some slides. We put them into our deck for you.
Little time.
Yeah. So we're going to start off with Ben Hampton from the District Department of Transportation. Come on.
Thank you, Andrew, and good evening, everybody. I thought Andrew might lead my introduction with the fact that I'm a former COG alum and actually used to staff the CAC many years ago, and have been through several TIP forums and CLRB updates and the launch of the Visualize brand for the long range plan. So it's fun to be back tonight and see all of that in action several cycles and years later. In my current role, I'm at the District Department of Transportation in our Resource Allocation Office. It is essentially the budget office for DDOT. And the work that we do informs and is informed by the TIP process here at the TPB. So we can go to the next slide and we'll jump in. Great. So I thought I would say a few words about our budget formulation process. I will say I am now more of a budget person than a transportation planner. So this is the area of the process that I gravitate to a little bit more and know a little bit more about. But our budget formulation process at DDOT happens on an annual basis. Every fall, we go through our internal budget formulation process where we gather project and program needs from the project managers at DDOT, and we analyze those, and I'll say more on the next slide about the details of that process. But basically, every project or program need that is identified by folks who are in the field actually implementing projects comes to my team as a funding request. It comes in agnostic of funding source. So at DDOT, similar to other DOTs and city and state agencies, we have a mix of funding sources. So federal funding is a large portion of our capital budget at DDOT, but we also have a significant locally funded capital budget. So when the requests come in, we sift through them and figure out what would be most aligned with and best served by and most appropriate for federal funding. So it goes through that filter. And then, as I mentioned, the Resource Allocation Division then analyzes project requests further, compiles those, and we generate scores and use a prioritization process, which I'll go through more in just a second, to help identify what the agency priorities are as they stack up against various criteria. Andrew mentioned the shorthand for all the items that are in the TIP projects and programs. The diagram on the right kind of highlights the fact that our TIP, our STIP, our CIP, all of our capital planning documents do contain a mix of programs and projects. So projects can be bridges, they could be bike lanes, they could be roadway changes, pedestrian bridges, all sorts of things. We also have a number of programs in our plan as well. And you can see that includes some maintenance and prevention programs and other operations type activities to maintain our street system and other transportation systems, as well as programs like transportation demand management, which we have a robust version of in the district. We can go to the next slide. So I mentioned a second ago that we have various prioritization processes in place at the district. We look through a number of different lenses as we consider all of the project and funding requests that come in and what should be prioritized for funding, both within our federal portfolio as well as our local portfolio. One of the main drivers of that is MOVE DC, which is our long-range transportation plan for DC. And that was first adopted in 2021 and has been updated several times over the past few years But it centers around 7 main goals, which we use as part of the budget formulation process to score and rank projects. And those goals are safety, equity, mobility, management and operations, project delivery, sustainability, and enjoyable spaces. When our project managers submit funding needs to us to review, we put it through a filter where we score each project, each program against these 7 goal areas. And that's what you can see a snapshot of on the slide. We also, in addition to our Move DC lens, apply an equity lens. And so we have a robust equity assessment tool that we use to evaluate the impacts of projects on our residents. Go to the next slide. I mentioned the budget development process. This is a more detailed version of that. I won't go through everything here, but you know, as a state, DDOT is interesting because we were able with a state DOT and a city transportation agency. And so our annual formulation cycle looks like a city budget process, but incorporates elements of planning and budgeting that's required to meet our federal requirements as well, because we do receive federal funding. So we go through an internal vetting process within DDOT, and then once those, you know, we apply the various analysis lenses, we do our own prioritization against citywide priorities as well, and then we send our budget request to the mayor. The mayor's team reviews it. They make updates and changes. They send it to the council. The council holds hearing. They make more changes. And finally, in the summer, we have an approved budget and CIP, which incorporates the federal component of our budget. Go to the next slide. Andrew mentioned earlier, the best laid plans always change. So we do our best in the resource allocation office and as part of DDOT to forecast out what we anticipate building or operating in the 4 years of the TIP and our STIP. As Andrew mentioned, there's the regional TIP, the state TIP, or the state. The state's TIP is the STIP. So there you go. You can see on the side. But you know, we do our best to plan those projects and funding levels, but things do always change. As you can see on the screen, a couple of examples, bids come in high. We've seen a lot of construction arena inflation over the past several years. There are also always, in complicated urban environments, unforeseen conditions that can drive up increases in project costs. So my team manages that or sort of monitors those things, and we have processes in place to make changes as needed. Internally, small changes are things that we typically approve. As you go up in dollar amounts, we involve higher levels of city leadership. On the external side, to meet our federal requirements and to make sure that we continue to be in alignment with the regional TIP, we do also participate in the, that's not a voluntary participation, you're required to participate in the regional TIP amendment process. So each of us have different thresholds, but at DDOT, any time a project is going to have a project increase of at least 20%, that comes to the TPB for a vote. Anything that's under 20%, we can do more administratively with Andrew's team, but we do have amendments that happen throughout the year and warrant further review and input by the public. And so that's anytime, again, we have anything that increases in cost by more than 20%, it will go through the monthly amendment process. So that's all on the revision process, but the next slide, I think, if it's still in there, it is. Andrew mentioned, yes, this is great. Andrew mentioned that each of the states are on a different STIP process. For the DC STIP, sometimes we're in sync with the TPB TIP process, sometimes we're not. This year is an example of when we're not. We will actually be releasing our draft 26 to 29 STIP in the spring for public comment. That'll be a time when the planning document itself, as well as the project list, will be available again for folks to review and ask questions about comments on. So that is our process in a nutshell, and you'll hear different versions of this from my fellow state DOTs coming up.
Thanks, Ben. Next, we'd like to turn it over to Ms. Carrie Snyder from the Maryland Department of Transportation.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. Like Andrew mentioned, my name is Carrie Snyder. I am the regional planner at the Maryland Department of Transportation at the Secretary's Office, in the Office of Planning, Programming, and Project Delivery. And I kind of do a lot of different things within the TPB sphere, and within our Office of Planning, Regional Planning at MDOT. So I want to thank everybody for coming out. This is one of the essential parts of the process of developing these types of documents. So thank you for your attendance. We know it's not easy to be out in DC or anywhere at a public meeting on a Thursday evening. So thank you. Go to the next slide, Andrew. All right, so because I don't have the time, because frankly, we would be here all night to get into every Maryland project that is in the TPB's upcoming tip. I'm gonna give more of the high level overview of the process and how Maryland participates in the metropolitan planning and programming part of these the tip and the long range transportation plan. So the building blocks of the tip from Maryland's perspective starts at the very top, which is the 2050 Maryland Transportation Plan. That is our 20-year mission document that develops a balanced multimodal approach to transportation planning. And that document is updated every 5 years as we're required. The 2050 MTP, or as it's called, the playbook, serves as our foundational planning document for MDOT, so that we can articulate all of the state's transportation goals and our guiding principles. And it is the guide for all of our transportation investments. And as you can see, the goals over on the right, in enhancing security and safety, promoting environmental stewardship, delivering system quality, and serving the community and supporting the economy. Those kind of serve as the 4 main pillars. And there's more details as we get, down into all of these different sectors that guide all of our transportation decisions. Next slide. So, but before we get into the tip, I wanted to start off with the CTP, which is our 6-year capital budget. That is the Consolidated Transportation Program. Also a program, not a plan. Program means funding. Program is available and committed to projects that we've publicly stated, these are what we're going to fund. Yes, we do have money for it, and you can count on us essentially to build it. So that contains all of the state's major and minor transportation programs and projects and administrative stuff, like everything that we mentioned. But under the Moore-Miller administration, MDOT intends to use the funding in the CTP to enhance safety and security, deliver system quality, and serve our communities by supporting the economy, so that Marylanders can receive a transportation system that provides access to jobs, affordable housing, food, healthcare, amenities, recreation, and other critical services that they need for their everyday lives. The CTP, even though it is a 6-year document, it takes about a year fully to create through the work of collaboration with MDOT staff and our local jurisdictions, who we hear from on a pretty regular basis, but there are certain things that are basically codified in Maryland law that dictate how some of that goes. And so that collaboration between the state and local needs is factored into the early spring timeframe, where they are submitting priorities and local needs through a letter process. Those priority letters represent the county's internal rankings of their state projects that they've deemed that are most important to them and best reflect their local needs. And they often submit a public input process that factors into their ranking internally before it comes to us. And similar to the 3C process, MDOT's budget is continuously being updated on an annual basis, and it's comprehensive in its process. As you can see, we have 5 different modal administrations under MDOT. That is the State Highway Administration, Maryland Transit Administration, Maryland Port Administration, Motor Vehicle Administration, and Maryland Aviation Administration. Maryland MDTA is our transportation authority. It has a separate budgeting process, and it does not factor, their projects are included in our CTP, but they have a separate funding and bonding authority that is not included in the rest of the transportation funding. And as always, public involvement and feedback throughout that county priority letter process and at the annual secretary's tour is a vital part of this process. And as you can see on the right, it is updated annually and it is a continuous process. So the first one top on the right, I know the font is very small, I apologize, but essentially it is, the MDOT modes identify the needs and the jurisdictions identify their local needs, which then goes into the priority letter process, around April timeframe. Then we conduct an internal prioritization process for just the capital improvement projects that are over 5 million, the big ones. And then our draft CTP is posted around September. September 1st, we're required to have that out. And then it goes out for public comment essentially, which is the Secretary's annual fall tour. We just completed that a couple weeks ago. I did my last tour meeting in Prince George's County last week. So that process goes between September and November every year. And then our final CTP after that public involvement is submitted to the Maryland legislature through the governor's budget at the third Wednesday of every January. And then it goes through the legislative and the budgeting process with the General Assembly, gets approved, signed by the governor, goes active July 1, and then we start all over again. It's very fun. I love it. All right, next slide. So the funding that goes into the CTP projects and subsequently the TIP projects, all of it can kind of be captured here, but it only touches for the TIP, it only touches the projects that are funded using federal funding or projects that might not be federally funded but are regionally significant, meaning they are on an interstate system, they are a widening project, they cross state lines, those types of things. So an MDTA project, for example, might not have federal funding because it's funded using their transportation toll revenue, but because it's on like I-95, it would be included in a TIP. So the funding through the TTF, which is our Transportation Trust Fund, includes all of these lovely different taxes, fees, titling, different sales, operational revenue, federal aid. It all goes through one funnel and then gets distributed out to all of our transportation modal administrations. And since MDOT encompasses all these different modes, we're able to direct our resources to priority projects statewide and strategically allocate state funding basically to maximize the federal funding that is available to us. So because we are multimodal and flexible, when there is an undauntingly large influx of federal funding like we saw in the IIJA many years ago, basically that's like, you know, we have to have a 20% match. So we said, okay, all right, well, let's see what we can rearrange, see what we can postpone so we can take advantage of all of this federal funding, which, you know, was a huge influx into Maryland's capital program. All right, next slide. So how all of this works from the 30,000 foot level, big picture, starting basically over on the right with planning phase, which is our MTP, our playbook, and the coordination with our 6 Maryland MPOs and their long range transportation plans. And then in the invest phase, we have our CTP, our budget document, the 6 MPO tips, and then our STIP, which is the statewide tip. And then under implement, we keep track of that implementation of these projects as they're executed through asset management with our different transportation modes. And finally, with evaluate, Maryland has been producing the attainment report for many, many years, which is submitted through our legislature process and monitored at the Secretary's office level. And then the more recent influx with the last federal authorization with the performance-based planning and programming and monitoring those 6 transportation performance measures, factoring that into our attainment report process. But throughout all of the steps in this process, we're either soliciting or receiving public feedback, comments, questions, which are all essential in the decisions that we're making about those transportation investments and where they're going to go. And then last slide. So finally, we do have our STIP, our most recently approved STIP went live on July 1st of this year. That is our fiscal 25 to 28 statewide transportation improvement program. It is important to know that this TIP, the 26 to 29, is not going to be directly approved by Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration. Basically, USDOT has to get that approval through the Maryland and DC and Virginia state DOTs. And so we basically amend the TIP into our STIP and get approval through it, through our federal partners, that process. The STIP is essentially, it includes all 6 of the Maryland MPO's TIPs. And then additionally, any regionally significant projects, in the rural, non-metropolitan areas, where there's about 7 of those counties in Maryland that don't fall into a metropolitan planning area. And so we include those TIPs without change and include those non-metropolitan projects. And all of those are identical to what we are annually agreeing to fund in our CTPs. Like Ben said, that's it in a nutshell. Complicated, detailed nutshell.
While we're transitioning, I'm just gonna remind everybody, we're gonna do a Q&A at the end, but I can collect questions as we're going. So if you have any questions, I'll gather those up now and just keep them coming.
Thanks, Carrie. Next, we're gonna hear from Regina Moore at the Virginia Department of Transportation.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Regina Moore, and I am the Regional Planning Manager for our VDOT Northern Virginia District Office. My role is, I had a team of 1, but our functionary and planning, we have like 3 different groups on regional planning. There's also a functionary that deals with multimodal planning, and then also another group that deals with studies on the performance management group. And so I'm happy to be here to speak about VDOT's project prioritization process and what we do with this state to identify projects and how they're going to get funded. So starting with everything in our in Virginia starts with, it has to be identified in some type of planning document. And what you see highlighted here are 2 types of plans that we use to identify projects for funding. The first one is VTrans, and VTrans is Virginia's statewide transportation plan. This plan is legislated and is prepared for the Commonwealth of Transportation Board, or what I will call the CTB. And it's actually prepared by the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment, or what we commonly call as OIP. Basically, what VTrans does, it lays out the overall vision and goals for transportation in Virginia and plans to achieve those goals. So the goals of safety, economic competitiveness, healthy and sustainable communities are some of the key goals that's identified in VTrans. The plan is updated, and it identifies statewide multimodal needs used in a data-driven approach. And we use this approach in what is commonly known as our midterm needs. And these needs are established for throughout 10 years. These identified needs are what's used to help fund eligibility under our smart scale and guiding revenue sharing funds, which I will speak to in the next few slides. Under Transaction, Transaction is the Northern Virginia's long-range multimodal transportation plan that identifies potential projects to address regions' evolving travel needs. It is prepared by staff at the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, or what we call MBTA. And ultimately, the plan establishes a blueprint for projects that will reduce congestion, improve connectivity, and expand various travel choices. Since Transaction, it's not really fiscally constrained. It includes more projects that can be realistically be funded, but it just serves as the foundation of MBTA's 6-year program, which prioritizes and allocates regional revenue funds for projects. The current transaction plan was adopted back in December 2022, and the current plan, which basically this plan looks ahead 25 years, will be adopted, I believe, in 2026 or 2027. And I want to note with these plans, a lot of the goals and priorities, basically they align and match with what the TPB goals and priorities are. So I just want to make that note that we're, invested with similar goals as currently the plans and goals that are identified in the TPB framework document. Next slide, please. So how do we fund projects? Well, there are several funding sources that we use to help implement and construct projects. So starting at the federal level, you have our CMAQ dollars, our congestion mitigation air quality, you have RSTP, the Regional Surface Transportation Program, HSIP, Highway Safety Improvement Program, and then our TAP, or our Transportation Alternative Program. There are lots and lots of state dollars and different funding programs under that, revenue sharing, safety, interstate, and ITTTF, which stands for Innovation and Technology Transportation Fund. And these monies is used to fund high-tech infrastructure type of improvements. Say, for example, if you've been along I-95 interstate, you see those variable speed limit signs, and that's funded through ITTF. Looking at regional funds, this goes back to some of the monies that's coming from ABTA. They have a 70% funding source that basically funds multimodal projects that are identified within their transaction plan. And then we have money from our local government through their capital improvement programs, also proffers anything that when a developer is looking to develop an area, sometimes they invest back. And these are commitments that they use to mitigate impacts to what the new development would create. So it's, for example, like sidewalks or new roadway facilities. And then we also have our toll revenues. A portion of the revenue collected are given to support multimodal improvements within that specific corridor. And some examples are 95 and 395 and 495. And then we have our public-private partnerships, or what we commonly call P3. And they receive like one-time concessionaires to fund projects, again, along that specific corridor. And for example, that was used along the I-66 corridor, outside the Beltway corridor. Next slide. So our 6-year improvement plan, or what we call SYIP, basically is required by state law. The Virginia 6-year improvement plan allocates public funds to transportation projects over a 6 fiscal year period, which really just summarize plan expenditures for both VDOT and our sister agency at DRPT that handles more of the transit projects within the state. The CTB is responsible for updating the SYIP every year. So as revenue estimates are updated, new priorities are identified, and existing projects have the opportunity to advance. And with this process, like so many things, we have like a public feedback process, right? Public involvement process is key. So every spring of the year, we are mandated by Virginia Code to have these public meetings, and these public meetings are facilitated by our Secretary of Transportation, along with the commissioner and our other state level leadership facilitates those meetings, and those meetings are held statewide. So Northern Virginia, we are a region. We have 9 different districts, and we are the one of those districts. So the CTP, they go across the state through each district and have these meetings, again, trying to get feedback from the public on their thoughts and what they would like to see, or provide comments on what's in the draft SYP. And once that happens, basically the SYP is adopted by the CTB in July of each year. And what you see next, we do a lot of studies. We have a lot of studies and programs. And what I'm just highlighting here tonight are 2 of our key study programs. Studies do play a vital role in how we do select projects in Virginia. The first one listed here is our STARS, which is our strategically targeted affordable roadway solutions and project pipeline studies. These studies focus on advancing multimodal priorities and developing recommendations to meet that identified V-Trans need, midterm need, as I mentioned earlier. And so for STARS, the overall goal is really to develop solutions that can be programmed in the SYP. And then there's multiple recommendations from these studies that have been successful in getting funded and awarded, primarily through Smart Scale, which I'll talk about in the next couple of slides. Project Pipeline focuses on planning and project development on advancing the CTB priorities that's listed within our V-Trans plan. These studies really just streamline the project planning and improve the project readiness And it really just helps solve problems on how we're going to deal with our transportation needs with very limited transportation dollars. Next slide, please. So smart scale. Smart scale, it's another acronym that we tend to use a lot of acronyms and stuff, but smart scale is a long one, but smart scale really stands for system management allocation of resources for transportation, safety, congestion, accessibility, land use, economic development, and environment. So smart scale is really one of our key prioritization processes. It was established by the General Assembly back in 2014. And it's one of the key ways that, again, we select projects in Virginia. So the table that you see highlighted here basically is a funding history of all of these current 6 rounds of smart scale. And smart scale it's a statewide program, and money in trying to get projects funded is very, very competitive amongst the various applicants across the state. And applicants can include regional bodies, NPOs, PDCs, trans agencies, and also your localities. And as shown, you can see here, funded the NOVA project compared to the rest of the state. We're funding each round is averaging about $1 billion+, and that money is distributed amongst the applicants when they apply for these dollars. And you can see in the last column or the last 2 columns where Northern Virginia fits into the realm of things with our applications over the last 6 rounds. I would say, with the exception of round 6, you notice that Nova District has received smart scale funding for between 11 and 21 projects, with the exception of this latest round, where we received only 3 projects compared to the rest of the state. And the next round of smart scale begins around round 7. That starts actually on March 1st. And the applications are due August 1st. And the new funding for smart scale will be added for our FY 2028 for this 6-year cycle of FY 28 through 2022 through 2033. Next slide, which is my last slide. So smart scale, it uses a very objective quantitative performance scoring to allocate transportation funding dollars. It is performance-based and measures benefits relative to the cost of the project. The CTB, basically, they assign these weights and factors that you see here, which are based on V-Trans principles and goals. So as shown in the table, you see the 6 that is used for how we score the projects to get funding. So Northern Virginia District falls within category A. So depending on where the project is, determines the factors and the weights of those scores. And by Northern Virginia being in one of the more populated or the populated area of the state of Virginia, we receive the highest weight when you consider congestion mitigation, weighing 45% out of the overall score, followed by accessibility, safety, environmental quality, economic development, and land use. And what you would see with the land use, there is no numerical weight associated with that. And it's just because it's just added, it's 100% added to the final score. So many of the projects selected and funded are included in the TPB tip, as what my fellow colleagues in VDOT and NDOT had mentioned. Our Virginia STIP does not align with the tip. And so right now we are currently in the process of updating our STIP. Our STIP will be updated next summer, and that will cover fiscal years 27 through 2030. And with that said, I'm done and I'm happy to answer your questions.
What's the questions at the end?
Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, that's right. Thank you.
All right. And last but certainly not least, and I know we've been pressing him for time. We're lucky to have him still. Mark Phillips from WMATA. Let's go.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, I hate to do this, but I actually have a prior engagement that I have to run to, so I'm gonna do this really, really fast. Mark Phillips, Director of Regional Mobility Planning at WMATA or Metro. Basic, long-term and strategic planning. Next slide. This is 101 for everybody in the room. I saw with all the hands, like, you know what a capital program is, but it's always good to like touch base. This is real things that we buy, repair, replace on either an annual basis or an ongoing basis. Things like vehicles, track, bus stops, rail stations, and repairing and rehabbing that. Next slide. Our capital program exists on 3 different levels and at different scales and levels of detail and specificity. So we update these things every single year. We have a 10-year broad plan, which is all the ideas that we think these types of capital investments and programs that we think we have to work on over the next 10 years. It's unconstrained, as you heard from some of my colleagues. Specific projects and ideas aren't necessarily matched with specific funding amounts or funding sources. But then we have a 6-year capital improvement program where we do have a limited set of investments we know we're going to do over the next 6 years, matched to our expected financial capacity. Not necessarily define financing plan for each individual project, but we know how much we're going to spend and how much we think we're going to have to spend and what we're going to spend it on. And then every single year, that 6-year CIP gets boiled down to a budget. Very specific, every project, every program, everything we're going to do that year has a specific funding amount and a specific funding source. And all this stuff is oriented towards a prioritized focus on repairing and rehabbing our existing system, getting the best use and value out of that, and making sure that we're operating reliable, safe, efficient service. One of the new priorities, or relatively new priorities, is also a focus on cost efficiency for our jurisdictional partners, our state and local partners. We're trying to find operational strategies, but also capital investments that can decrease the per unit cost of operating that service. So we can actually maybe do more with less. Next slide. This is complicated, but I think I can walk through it pretty easily. This is kind of our internal process. You heard from my colleagues, everyone has one of these. So we have our own strategic transformation plan. This is our 5-year plan. There's 4 goals, a bunch of objectives. That is kind of how we prioritize investments in-house. But we also get a lot of data from different sources, like our asset management plan. We get really good data on like the quality, the state of our assets, the conditions out in the field. So we have that. We have these priority matrix based off the strategic transformation plan. We look at how the service is doing. We take all these needs, we take all these ideas, and we match them to our constraints, right? So like, what are operational impacts if we have to do a particular investment here? How bad is that going to mess up service if we have to close particular stations or segments, or maybe put more buses out of service than we expected? Our funding capacity is the big one, but also our ability to execute. Even with all the money in the world, you only have so many people and so much time in a year to do capital projects. Those are all the constraints that we use to take those needs and translate them into that 6-year CIP and the annual budget. As I mentioned, if you look at the bottom, our 10-year plan unconstrained, there's a lot of new ideas in there, things that we haven't done before. We know the strategic opportunities that we want to start working on. When you look at our 6-year CIP and our annual budget, that becomes much more defined. It's programs and projects. There are very few new needs or new ideas. And just quickly, Andrew said these phrases, but I think everyone knows we, especially as a transit provider, have a lot of ongoing programs. These aren't necessarily specific things we're going to buy, but we know every year we have to repair our rails. Let's say this. We know we have to replace old buses with new ones. There's a lot of things that we have estimates for that we do every single year. Next slide. That was our internal process. But I mentioned that we update our CIP and our annual budget as well as our 10-year plan every single year. And there's always a big public engagement aspect and stakeholder engagement to that. It usually happens in the spring. We go out on the system, we have a bunch of people with surveys and comment forms and other customer information inputs. We always have a website. We partner with community-based organizations, over 200 of those, to go to their meetings, go get some of their constituents and their clients. We run surveys, we're on social media, and we have in-person public meetings or public hearings with our board. We had 3 of those in person and 1 virtual. So with all that engagement over about a month or 2, we had like 2,500 comments. We've considered that in terms of our draft CIP and our draft budget before we move to final adoption by our board. Can you have 2 slides? I just want to talk briefly about how that gets incorporated into Visualize 2050 and the TIP, right? So like, we take our 10-year capital plan and we do our best to look 15 years in the future, a 25-year horizon, based off things that we think we're gonna do, things we know we need to do in the future, and our best guess about how much money, what kind of resources we'll have in that 25-year horizon. And that's what we submit into the long-range transportation plan every 4 years, visualize 2050. And I just want to point out the green boxes show where public engagement happens in that. So I mentioned we do public engagement in our CIP and budget every single year. There's also a really big public engagement effort for the long-range plan. Then every year, we're also doing every couple of years, we're doing the TIP, right? So when we have our CIP, when we have our annual budget, when those get approved every year, we modify the TIP. And that gets into DDOT's TIP. That's where we put our stuff at the state level. It all goes into DDOT's TIP. If you go back one slide, there's a lot of information on here, but I want to like nutshell it. The top half shows our funding sources for our capital program. We get about 25 to 30%, kind of fluctuates, in federal funding. That's formula funding that every transit agency gets. That's also DC, or the WMATA is a little bit different, that we get a set specific award from the federal government every year. It's around $150 million, and that's matched by our state locals. So that's about 25–30%. Most of the rest is state and local match from our jurisdictional partners, as well as debt financing, bonding issues that we put out every single year to supplement our capital program based on and supported by one funding source. This $500 million dedicated funding that we get from our state and local partners every year starting in 2018. The reason I want to really highlight this is that dedicated funding, that $500 million, is the only funding source Metro has that we can issue debt on. And none of these funding sources are both guaranteed to come to Metro and grow every year to keep up with inflation. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in a second, but this means that our capital program, most of it is set, doesn't grow, it isn't inflated. So over the past couple of years with really high inflation, we've lost a lot of buying power. On the bottom half, you can see like what this what the annual budget looks like and the CIP looks like when it gets translated to the TIP. We kind of roll it up into 6 broad categories. So this is one for one what you'll see when you look at the TIP. So our programs and projects are up in like rail cars and rail car facilities, rail systems, bus and paratransit systems and facilities, track and structural rehab. We also have debt service because we have to start paying off that debt. Next slide. So that's what the TIP looks like. Next slide. But I can't talk about Metro's funding or the TIP without flagging a very serious crisis facing the region. I hope most of you know about it. It's been in the news for about 16 months. But as I mentioned, because we don't have that guaranteed funding that also grows with inflation, we have a fiscal cliff on our capital program coming in FY 2029. We will not be able to issue any more debt. We won't be able to issue any more debt capacity or debt financing. So in 2029, we have to start decreasing our annual spend on our capital budget from around an average of 2.2 billion to 1.4 billion. And that will persist into the future without new additional funding. So that means the TIP will have to be updated, the TIP will have to be reduced. And if you go to the last slide, that threatens all the good things that transit brings to this region. We have an immense impact on economic development, on quality of life, billions of dollars of tax revenue, $1 billion of investment around our system, rail stations and bus corridors. If we have to reduce our capital program, it's going to have an impact on the health of our assets, on the health of the system, on our ability to provide service, and that will have related efforts or related impacts on the economy, people's ability to travel around the region. So I just want to flag that there's a whole initiative called DMV Moves to try to get that funding and heal this fiscal cliff. And on November 17th, on Monday, the COG Board of Directors and Metro Board of Directors are going to consider recommendations for a regional task force and hopefully approve this regional funding that then has to go to our state partners and the state legislatures and try to get implementation. So with that, thank you.
I'm gonna keep gathering up those questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. Appreciate you staying next to us.
So if you guys have any questions, sorry, I do have to run, but Andrew has my contact info and I will respond.
Yeah, we'll get all the questions forwarded to him. Right now, we've realized we're running a little bit behind the clock, so we're just gonna give a quick run through our preliminary analysis of the TIP. We're gonna make it really quick because these numbers are very preliminary and they're going to change. So We don't want to get too in love with them. So I'll hand it over to Sarah Brown.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sarah Brown, and I'm a transportation planner at the TPB. And as Andrew said, these are very preliminary numbers. We're still in the public comment period and the interagency review period, so we're still updating the tip numbers. And then when the draft goes public for the final version, then that's when the numbers will be finalized. Next slide. So we started with a zero-based budgeting approach. So we started with about 577 records that the TPB and the member agencies reviewed. And then we whittled it down to about 355 active projects in the tip. So there was 93 projects were completed between the last tip and this current tip. And next slide. So here's just a breakdown of the 355 projects we have in the tip. It covers about $17.3 billion. On the right, the left-hand side, we have three different project record types. So we have discrete records, which are just single standalone projects. Then we have grouped records, which are standalone projects that are similar in nature, so we group them together. And then we have the ongoing programs, which are like the capital programs and like maintenance programs, like most of the WMATA projects are considered ongoing. On the chart on the right, those are expansion projects versus non-expansion projects. So a non-expansion projects are stated with repair, operating, or maintenance type projects. For expansion are roadway widenings, adding bridges, intersection improvements, types of projects like that. Next slide. And then the last slide I'll go over is a funding by source. So we have federal highway, which is about 30% of our funding source, and then FTA, which are our federally required sources that we need to make sure we include in the tip. And then we have also other other funding sources such as state, local, and private. So those make up just over 50%. And then I'm going to hand it over to Mark to finish up some preliminary numbers.
Hi everyone, I'm Mark Moser. I'm another transportation planner here at COG, and I'll be running through this real quick. You can go to the next slide, please. So here are some of the major projects in this current tip. There's only 10 here, and they are the most major projects in terms of funding. So as you can see, the top three are the Long Bridge project at 2.6 billion, the Purple Line at 3.7 billion, and the MD 335 bus rapid transit at 424 million. That's the total project cost, which is funding that is in the tip and also before or after the tip. So the total tip funding is just these 4 years that are in the tip, 26 to 29. Yeah, you go to the next slide, please. So here are bicycle and pedestrian projects and accommodations. So of the 350 project records that we have, totaling over 17 billion, approximately 154, 43% include bike and ped accommodations, which are including sidewalks, bike lanes, shared use paths and trails, shared use bridges and tunnels, and ADA ramps, signals, bump outs, refuge islands, plenty of other things. And then the last slide. So here are the regional goals for TPB. We have 8 of them in our regional framework, and every tip record supports at least one and sometimes multiple of them. So if you add all these numbers, there's more records and project goals than there are projects. But as you can see them spread out through safety, maintenance, reliability, efficient system operations, affordable and convenient reliability, so on and so forth. And you can see them split by DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And with that, that is finishing up the analysis portion of the tip. Very, very preliminary. You'll see more and more stuff coming out as, of course, the tip is published. And I'll throw it back to Andrew for the next steps in the tip development process.
Okay, great. I'm just gonna try and sit here and project, and hopefully everybody can hear me. In the back, can you hear me okay? Yeah, and how about online? Can everybody hear me all right? Hear me, see me, good?
We can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, all right, we've got a lot of questions that have come in, so thank you very much for this. This is really exciting. We're gonna start off with some for DDOT for Ben. We have a question here. How has Congress's actions that rescinded a 1 resulted, thank you, in a $1.1 billion cut for FY 2025. How does that impact the TIP, if at all?
The short answer is it has not impacted our capital investments when it comes to transportation. The city, that mostly affected the operating budget for the city, and the mayor and her team figured out a way to kind of navigate that while minimizing the impacts on the capital investments.
Wonderful, thank you. And I will note, we've got a lot of questions here, some of which are very project, some of which go into the project specifics. I will note that Ben and Carrie and Regina are not actually project managers for any of these projects, and probably won't be able to get you some detailed information necessarily tonight in response to some of those projects. But we do have, they will be able to, get back to you, and we have Carrie still.
She stepped away.
She has stepped away. Okay, all right, I was like, did she?
No, she.
Okay, right, for Regina, let's say, pursuant to Smart Scale, does Virginia look at land use changes and interventions to mitigate transportation problems or to leverage transportation facility investments?
Good question. I'm not the expert on smart scale, but as we know, smart land use factors in. And it's all dependent, right? With smart scale, we have applicants from the localities, and the localities are responsible for their land use changes. So I would have to dig a little bit deeper if there's a specific project that pertains to, but I would have to follow with a better answer response for that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Let's see, for Carrie.
For me.
Yes, welcome back. Has any consideration been made regarding an expansion of tolling to generate revenue and mitigate any gaps between the available funding and needs?
Is there a specific corridor?
Has any consideration been made regarding an expansion of tolling?
Well, I can certainly say that the active project in the DC region, the ALB, the American Legion Bridge plus 270, is still active and moving forward. There is going to be information on the commitments made to Montgomery County on the transit commitments from a few years ago when we were discussing the project initially at the beginning of the Moore Miller administration. They had basically paused the project and resubmitted it to a public forum format to make sure that they were adequately addressing the purpose and need of the project before moving it forward. And there were a few different changes made to the project based on feedback and based on the current administration's priorities. And the priority is the maintenance and replacement of the American Legion Bridge and the commitments to the transit funding for the county government and their needs as they are associated with the project. So the question of expansion of tolling the administration is always taking things under consideration, but I'd have to double check on that. But so far, that is the only project within the National Capital Region. In Baltimore, that is where the Baltimore region has the majority of the Transportation Authority's projects and properties. So like the bridges, tunnels, the I-95, the express lanes. So as of right now, there's nothing else in the National Capital Region and in the TIP in the long range plan that is being funded through toll road.
Thank you,
But I
Carrie.
can get more information if.
Yeah. And we'll have their contact information as well if you want to reach out to them.
I have business cards if anybody wants.
All right, she's a business lady. Okay, We have a question for DDOT, actually, though I'm gonna take the first swing at this one, if you don't mind, Ben.
Go for it.
And then I'll leave it to you. I really like this question. DDOT budgeting, how can we translate this lengthy and complex process to immediate responses to neighborhood level concerns? For example, how do DC residents make sense of 48-hour timeline to fix potholes versus a 300+ day timeline to fix sidewalks or address other multimodal safety concerns? Now, I'm not actually going to speak to the multimodal safety concerns necessarily, but I did want to sort of convey a story of let me try to get this one right. One day we had a call from a concerned citizen who was working with a study group who wanted to do something about decking over North Capitol Street around Rhode Island Avenue, just over northwest northeast. And at first I was like, I don't probably calling the wrong person here, So we talked to him for a little while. We're looking at maybe getting him connected with the Transportation Alternatives Program. We maybe looked at our TLC program. But what we did was we put him in touch with somebody at DDOT, and the person at DDOT, I think it was either Kevin or Sam Brooks, told them to talk to their ANC representative and to talk to the mayor. And what they did was they got their ANC representative to get the mayor to put it in the budget. And lo and behold, the next time we did a tip, I saw decking over of North Capitol Street at Rhode Island Avenue in the tip as a study. And I was like, wow, that actually worked. So that's my little story of a direct path from citizen to tip. I'll turn it over to Ben to finish out with more actual real response.
I don't know if I have a better story than that. That's a really great example. One thing I realized after I gave my presentation is that I didn't talk about the other sources of ideas for projects. For our process that we run as the resource allocation team, we rely on inputs from project and program managers. It's an internal process, but they get the ideas from somewhere. And there's a lot of ways that new ideas for improvements in the city come through to the DDOT staff. And so ANCs are a great example of that. Our transportation planning group is always out in the field gathering information. We have a robust external affairs team and community engagement team. We're always out at various events gathering ideas. So there is a sort of a bottom up or grassroots effort when it comes to some of the ideas that DDOT ultimately pursues and funds through these various strategies. And there are other points in the process too. I kind of glossed over them earlier, but the mayor has her engagement forums around the budget each year. Council has a robust hearing process. So in addition to contacting ANC members, there are also council members who have a big voice in the process.
Yeah, I didn't speak. It went through ANC to a council member to the mayor. What was that? So, great, thank you, Ben. Next, what do we have? I guess this is one for sort of all three of you. It's a relatively sort of generic question. What are examples of unforeseen circumstances that drive up project costs? Can you give us some fun examples of what happened with that?
You make an assumption on what a certain parcel of land will cost on a project. I actually had one in Montgomery County where the cost of the land surrounding the project area was $10 million less than they estimated. And so people were wondering, they're like, why is this project so much less than it was in last year's CTP? And they're like, did you reduce the scope of the project? What happened there? And it was the cost the cost of the right of way purchases for the project area. But like many people have said, construction inflation costs are what has been hitting Maryland particularly hard. The cap on the debt revenue, like there's only so much money you can issue to basically create debt for yourself. And if your bond rating goes down, you have to pay higher percentages on the repayment of that debt. And so there's things on that affect the whole capital program and from Maryland's perspective, and then very small specific project bid issues that can potentially change the cost of a project.
And to Regina, if you could
Yeah.
sort of like, if, what, in addition to like what would change the cost, what might that mean for the project? How might VDOT respond to, would that mean they would change the scope of the project, would cancel it altogether? Another sort of aspect of that.
Well, I was gonna get to an example of what I had shown related to Smart Scale. And as you may recall, for this past round where Northern Virginia only got 3 projects funded, where before we were getting, an average of 13 or 14 projects funded. And why we only have 3 projects, being that Virginia is the most populated area in the state, and we only got 3 projects funded, was because of the sheer costs. The number of applicants putting in, trying to get money, and with Smart Scale, you have to leverage the dollars. And so because of the costs that Carrie had mentioned related to inflation and cost being part of how a project is weighted. That's why Northern Virginia only got 3 projects funded compared to our other counterparts. So inflation is really a big deal with regards to that. I'll just leave it at that, Andrew.
Okay. Yeah,
That was
great, thank you.
Ben, you didn't want to add anything?
Well,
Any fun stories about price
I
running?
was just gonna zero in on the word that Carrie used, which was assumptions. You make a lot of assumptions in planning projects, and you plan projects many years out, and by the time you actually come around to building them, inflation could have happened. In DC, something that we run into a lot. We're an older urban area that has many layers of utilities and former road infrastructure and streetcar infrastructure. And so there are things you don't know until you open up the ground. Or if you're gonna repair a bridge, nobody can see inside between the 2 deck layers. And so you pull the top one off and you realize, oh, there's more deterioration here than you thought. So we either have to do more work on that or use a different technique, and that can drive up costs, especially if it happens kind of on an emergency basis.
Yeah, there was a streetscape project in Middletown, which is in Frederick County, many years ago that was like 5 years delayed past the potential estimated open to traffic because of utility complications, and it was just one thing right after the other. And so it just kept delaying the completion, which drives up the cost, which takes funding away from other projects, and so it's a snowball effect.
All right, thank you. We have a question here. What role does equity play during the planning process? What role, if any, does equity play?
I'll start. So at DDOT, we have for the past few years had a really robust equity assessment tool that we use. The mayor and the council both have dedicated equity initiatives that have helped inform district agencies when it comes to our budget processes and how we incorporate equity and the questions that we ask ourselves and the processes that we engage in to get feedback from the community. So that for us, for DDOT, turned into the equity assessment tool. It's a multi-point questionnaire and evaluation tool that we apply to every single project and program request that we get in the resource allocation office. And then use that to prioritize the project. So it's assessing impacts and scoring projects, but it's also how we engage with the community and understand needs in different parts of the city and different segments of our community.
Oh, I was just going to say, the Moore Miller administration, I know that there's a lot of uncertainty with the federal government administration, and a lot of these documents that we produce for the MPO level and are determined and are predicated upon federal approval. But definitely in Maryland, under our current administration, there's a commitment to diversity and equity in every aspect of the agency's goals. And so that factors into planning, it factors into planning. And we have internal assessment tools, that are outside of the MPO area. And it's factored into our project, scoring processes, with our prioritization chapter 30 process at MDOT, which is constantly being, evaluated internally and with our stakeholders. And so that is definitely a factor, in project selection and planning.
Okay. The last question I think we have.
We have some oral speakers.
We have some, okay. Actually, we did this. Okay, so, let's see. All right. I'm just gonna read this because I'm not good at summarizing, so, MDOT's American Legion Bridge, and I-270 project calls for Maryland to build and operate a segment of toll lanes within Virginia south of the bridge. I get the feeling this is gonna be a very project-specific question, so we might not be able to give you any specific answer tonight. But transportation experts say, as far as they know, one state building and operating private toll lanes in another state is unprecedented in the US. There's no foundation of standards. VDOT controls the underlying infrastructure, MDOT will build on. VDOT has the existing agreement with private partner Transurban. How will Maryland's public interests be protected? Carrie, I will let you respond or get back to this person.
Yeah, if you could send that to me, I could probably get a more specific answer.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the Eastern Seaboard, especially the DMV and a couple states above us, they're all very small. And so the issue of properties and ownership crossing over state lines is always going to be an issue, especially with interstate corridors. But nothing moves forward without like rock solid agreements in place, especially for big mega projects that have a lot of dollars on them and a lot of interested parties and stakeholders. And so I know with the agreement that happened between Virginia and Maryland governors a couple of years ago about the diversification of the payment of 20% Virginia, 80% Maryland for the bridge specifically. I'd have to get back on the specifics of that payment split. But the Maryland interest being protected, it's all through legal signed agreements that are pretty much on every major mega project where states cross lines, projects cross state line.
Great.
That's the one.
Excellent, thank you.
But I'll definitely get more details.
Okay. And I think we've just got one more really here, but this is also again gonna be very project specific. So I'm not even gonna actually ask you for an answer. We'll just sort of give it to you
Okay,
and
thank you.
know that you'll get
For
back
me?
to this
Okay.
person. For actually, this is for both Regina and for Carrie. Question for VDOT and MDOT on one of the projects in the tip. It is actually not a project in the tip. So
Is it the south side?
the next steps in the I-495 South Side study. The study might be in the tip. Is the study in the tip?
I don't see anything.
Yeah, I don't think the study is still, the
I
study
mean,
was in
still,
the,
it's
the
a
study.
NEPA, it's still.
The study was in the
Yeah.
23-26 tip. I don't know if it's in the draft new tip. But we all understand the question as a project. The I-495 South Side study, what options will be explored? So if you could, we'll get to that question if you could.
Yeah, I would say,
I-
well, because of the vote that happened, last month, we know that, TPB decided not to move forward with the inclusion of the Southside projects. And one of the things that came out of that action was that VDOT will, work with our partners and we will come back sometime next year. And also because we have a new governor-elect, a lot of that stuff will, have to be factored in with some of the decisions with our new administration coming in. So it's a to be determined, but Virginia is committed to working with Maryland and we will revisit that next year sometime.
Okay, we have one last commenter.
Okay.
Oh, that's the.
So Gail, you're gonna have to stand up and speak loud.
Oh.
We have to catch you on the microphones.
Okay, two. Environmental Protection Agency, with the new president. And everything that goes through transportation has to go through environmental protection. So what effect does that have? And last, projects that have been in your radar for years and it keeps staying at the bottom of the list. Move projects above them. So what happens to those? I mean, you know it's down there and you just keep it down and you keep putting stuff on top of it. So these are things that are affecting the whole, sections of the population. So those are my two questions.
Well, I can say that for the EPA question, how it affects our dealings with them. There's a couple of different areas where air quality and transportation overlap, specifically with the development of the air quality conformity analysis to make sure that we're not projecting to over emit what we've said that we're going to allow ourselves. And from what I've noticed, just with our federal transit and federal highway administration partners, like they just have a lot to do and not a lot of people to do it. And so they're overburdened, similar to maybe some other agencies. And so I know that, we work closely in coordination with people at FTA and FHWA, not as closely with EPA, but it overlaps in a couple of different places. And they've always kind of taken a long time to review and approve documents. But so far, we haven't noticed any big delays or impacts, other than maybe just a few months here and there. Anybody else on the EPA question?
I want y'all all to answer.
Yeah.
I live in DC, you could just.
Yeah,
For people to live in DC.
so we don't really have direct dealings with EPA, and it's very similar to what's with what Carrie had mentioned. Our EPA dealings would be directly with the Virginia DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality. Those are the staff at the state that deals more directly with the EPA directly. A lot of our dealings are through FHWA, dealing with with CMAC and all these other requirements when we do studies and we do projects, and but we don't have direct dealings with EPA per se, that level.
And I'm not super familiar with the different kinds of interactions that we might have with EPA, but I can say from our NEPA process and, the environmental reviews that our projects go through, I've not heard of specific delays caused by any of the staff shortages yet. Those processes can take a long time. So maybe that ripple effect just hasn't made its way through the process, but I'm not aware of any specific discrete examples of projects being delayed.
And the projects that are on the bottom, that's been on the bottom, still on the bottom.
I was hoping you wouldn't ask again about that. No,
Talk to your councilman and have them bump it up on their priority list.
yeah, there's just a lot of needs out there. There's not a lot of money to go around, and unfortunately, yeah, some things hang out at a certain place on the prioritization list for a long time. Sometimes it's due to the fact that they can be really expensive. So to bump that project up the list would mean bumping everything else down. That may or may not be the case in the project that you might be thinking of, but I know there are a couple of those for the district that we are just waiting for a sunnier day, more money to be able to move up.
And I will say that we haven't made a good practice of it in the past, but we are looking forward to, with our new TIP data software, looking into in next cycle or two, tracking projects and their progress and sort of monitoring those ones that have been sitting there at the bottom and making note of them, and sort of at least being like, hey, bringing them to somebody's attention and checking to see what's happening with them. So we are going to be monitoring that a little bit closer in the future. So thank you all very much for your questions. I think we might have one more.
No.
Okay.
What we're gonna do actually is summarize all the questions and make sure that we have the answers to all of them. So we'll keep all of these. So if you do have any additional questions, we'll go ahead and gather those up too. And we'll create a summary based on those questions. So we are way over for our next meeting, but that's okay, because this is very important.
I do just want to make one clarification on one. We've corrected it online. The Southside Express Lane study is in the draft TIP funded in FY 26 to 29. I misspoke. The study is, but
not the-
but not the project itself. So we don't know what shall come from that. Anyway, we want to thank you all very much, particularly for members of the CAC for letting us take over your evening. We really do appreciate it. We hope you enjoyed the dinner. Hope that made up for it. Like we said, Laura, will be collating all the questions and responses that we've had. If there's anything, I know there was a question that was submitted to Mark, who had to leave early, so we'll make sure that gets to him. But thank you, everybody, very much for coming tonight. Take care.
So we'll reconvene in room 4 and 5 for the CAC.
And thank you to our guests from D.M. and WMATA.
Thank you, ERG.
Yes, and thank you to our consultants, ERG. Wonderful.